Got it. Recording in progress. Well, first of all, just wishing everyone a Shana Tova and a Gmar Tov. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Shoshana Boyd Gelfand. I'm a member of New North London, and I have the privilege of sort of facilitating this evening, which is really going to be, I think, a looking back and a looking forward. And I will, in a second, invite Rabbi Jonathan to introduce our sort of videos of our four speakers tonight. But I want to just invite all of you to, as you listen to the speakers answer the questions that Rabbi Jonathan asks them, hear his voice asking them of you as well. There's going to be really two questions that we're going to be thinking about tonight. One is about what inspired us during COVID. On some level, it feels a bit awkward to ask that question because so many awful things happened over the past year and a half. But just because many awful things happened doesn't mean there weren't also some inspiring things that happened. And I know, for me, there were any number of things. The moment when I got that vaccination and just spontaneously said a blessing, that was a moment of inspiration. The moment when I finally got to hug my mother after having not seen her for a very long time, or even just really mundane moments of sitting there and stroking my dog and just feeling a sense of closeness and hope in the darkness. So there are moments of inspiration, and I invite all of you to be thinking about your own answer to that question, as well as the second question, which is, what are the challenges that lie ahead? I wish I could say that we are at the end of a long road and that we made it, and we should be celebrating that. I think we should be celebrating the milestone, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are certainly the time to be marking that milestone. But we have real challenges ahead. And so both looking back in terms of what's inspired us and looking forward in terms of what are the challenges ahead of us, those are our two big questions tonight as we sit here in the middle of the Yamim Noraim. And we have four incredible speakers on video who are going to share their thoughts on those questions. And then we have several wonderful rabbis who are going to interact in person. And I'm also going to be asking you to share your thoughts in chat. So we'll get a good generative discussion going here. But to start out with, I have gotten to see these videos and they're amazing. I will turn it over to Rabbi Jonathan to just introduce them. Let us in on how he got these people to do this and to share in their own thoughts about the past and the future. And introduce the videos. We'll all watch them together, and then we'll open it up for more conversation. Rabbi Jonathan.
Thank you, Rabbi Shoshana, and Shana Tova to everybody. When a number of us had a discussion about what to do, we've always had an event between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to try and set the tone. I think it was Rivka, you and Claire and Zahavit, you all said this needs to be uplifting. And it's been a very tough year in all kinds of personal ways in the world. But there have been, as you said, Rabbi Shoshana, moments of inspiration. And we thought we'd hear different voices, different people talk about them. Now, I would say that 3 of the 4 of our guests, who you'll hear me interview shortly, are friends. And I was very privileged to get to know them. And we tried to get them together for a sort of a live online, but dates were impossible. Reverend, now Bishop, Rose Hudson-Wilkin has spoken in the synagogue. She's twice been at the Bima singing by the waters of Babylon. She's much loved around our community, and she was chaplain to the House of Commons. She's now a bishop, and you'll hear she's wonderful. Ben Okri I got to know through Nikki, who's just joined me, and he spoke to us on the Friday night after the murder of George Floyd, and then stayed on for the service, and has come as what he's going to come to our sukkah, we hope, and he's He wrote very, very powerfully for The Guardian about racism, and he will pick up that theme. Matt Biggs first came to the synagogue as a panelist in Gardner's Question Time. We are the only synagogue who's hosted Gardner's Question Time, an absolute highlight of my career. It turns out he's a Christadelphian who's very philo-Semitic, and he's come to a number of services, really enjoyed it. And I think he's on this call, so we can welcome in person. And David Davis, I didn't yet know, but through David Bernstein, who was a former, I think, executive of the Football Association, he enabled me to contact him. He's really charming, and this came very, very soon after the penalty shootout for the Euro final and all the racism and the issues that followed that. So those are the interviews. They're very different in kind, but the questions are not. They are, as Rabbi Shoshana said, what's been inspiring in a challenging year and what lies ahead. I think over to the video. It's about 20 minutes, but they're very, very different parts of it and a lot to think about.
It's so lovely to be with you, Bishop Rose. I think your proper title is Right Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin. You're the Bishop of Dover. You've been chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen, to the Speaker of the House of Commons. In my mind, the greatest thing is that you've sung by the rivers of Babylon and you've spoken in our synagogue. So it's a real joy to have some time with you. What's been moving to you? What's been inspiring for you in what must have been a very, very challenging year and a half for you?
Thank you. It is good to be with you. And yes, I do remember those wonderful moments we shared together in your synagogue and at your table as well, sharing fellowship with your family. You know, I was consecrated, made a bishop in November of 2019. And then 3.5 months in, we went into a serious lockdown due to the pandemic. And I must say that it's been a very deeply challenging year, not just for me, but I think for everyone, and in particular those who are seeking to minister, seeking to serve. What I struggled with most of all was seeing those who were ill, those who were hospitalized, and not being able to go to them.
Yeah.
That pained me. I literally cried on many occasions when I heard the stories, when the ones that I was also aware of in terms of people who I knew going into hospital, nobody in terms of family and friends or priest being able to go to them. So that was a dark moment, I think. But I was equally inspired during that time. And that inspiration came because suddenly the world sat up and recognized that those who were important were people who cleaned our hospitals, people who packed the shelves in our supermarkets, people who cleaned our streets. People suddenly realized that these were not just people to be discarded, paid very little to, but actually they were the key to us getting through the pandemic and surviving it. So, you know, when I saw that, I was deeply moved and inspired by that we saw for the first time the realization, almost people becoming awakened to the fact that those who we regarded, society regarded as the least, were actually not the least, but the most important.
That's really moving. I couldn't agree more. There's this wonderful scene in the Talmud where a rabbi asks Elijah, who will inherit the world to come in this marketplace? And one of them is a jailer because he protects the women in jail. And the other is a clown because he makes the children laugh.
Wow.
What do you think we can hang on to what we've learned? What do you think are the challenges in the time ahead?
I think it is precisely that, for me, where the challenge lies. How do we not just slip back into being the busy people we were and ignoring the what we regarded as the little person, but how do we continue to hold each other up, to recognize humanity, actually to recognize God in each other? One of my favorite words is Ubuntu. Ubuntu. It is a South African Zulu word from the Xhosa language, which means I am because you are. In other words, our lives are intertwined with one another. And so for me, the challenge going forward is how might we continue to recognize that we're not an island by ourselves, and that our lives are intertwined with every other human being, not only the ones who we can see, not only the ones who belong to our faith group, but actually intertwined with the world, because it is the God who created the one world. So we belong together. We carry everyone with us together. That's, for me, is one of the greatest challenges going forward, that we might continue to uphold one another and not just think, I'm vaccinated, I'm all right, Jack, but know that I'm not all right until every other human beings are lifted up, and are also okay.
Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you as a religious leader and a spiritual leader in our country. Thank you, and I hope for much companionship in the time ahead.
Likewise,
Thank you.
peace,
Thank
blessings.
you. David Davies, I'm actually delighted to be with you and very grateful to you. You've been many years in journalism, with the BBC especially, in politics, education, crime, sports, and even the God slot. And you've been executive director of the FA also for many years. So sports and journalism is where your life meets. And it's been a big year for sport, with the Olympics, with the Euros, and much comment about them. So I wanted to ask you, what's moved you in this year? What's inspired you? And my follow-up question will be, what are the challenges ahead?
Jonathan, I'd say straight away that I have always believed from a very, very young age, when I was that extraordinary thing, a Manchester United supporter born and brought up on the Euston Road in central London, that sport can be a power for good in society. And I've believed that, and sport has changed my own life in so many ways. But as far as this particular year is concerned, yes, it's been an immensely difficult one for sport, because not least of all the ramifications of COVID, and then starting to allow the players to exist in their bubbles and to play, but in an empty stadia at the top level. That has been immensely difficult for the players, and it has changed the game, if I might say so. But there have been good things, of course, but there have been particularly bad things. And I think you're well aware of the bad things came out of the very end of the Euros, and that awful racist abuse that some of us get so angry about, because we believe that the solutions to some of this racist abuse online already exist, at least to mitigate it substantially. So that is one big problem. But as far as the period that has gone on, the past 18 months is concerned, you know what it's done to me? It's made me much more reflective about life, and perhaps, I hope, more grateful that I've had a full life, that I've traveled all over the world, that I've realized, I think, what is important: caring and kindness, which are the two watchwords. That's not original. There are so many other people who've come to the same conclusion. And I hope that I will take those lessons into the future.
So what should society learn from these 18 months of COVID, this bewildering time?
Well, I don't presume to be able to talk for society as a whole, but what I suspect an awful lot of people have learned is how precious, how precarious life is, how health matters so very, very much. And you know, I've had 2 quite serious strokes in my life, and lucky enough, even in my 70s, they told me I'm something of a poster boy for the Stroke Association. There is life, there can be life after stroke. The important thing is, as well, I would say to anybody and everybody, if you have ambitions, get on and do them, because, as I say, life is precious and life is precarious.
Thank you so much.
So it's a real honor and a pleasure to be with you, Matthew Biggs, a panelist from Gardener's Question Time, a personal friend. You've been to our synagogue. You're part of the Christadelphian community, very close to the Jewish community. And I know that it's also been a challenging year, not just for everyone, but particularly for you. And I wonder what you found sustaining and inspiring in this last year and a half.
So over the past 6 months, I've been treated for bowel cancer. Very thankfully, I've been very blessed in that it was picked up early. And I would say to anyone, when you get your little screening parcel come through the post, then don't leave it to one side. Don't be squeamish, get on with it, because actually it's turned out to be a lifesaver. And I've had a lot of experiences over the past 6 months that I never expected to have. So one thing that's really helped me is my faith, because I believe in God, and I believe that the Almighty is guiding, because he cares for us all. He's guiding my little life, and he's aware of what's happening. And I feel as though I'm a vine in a vineyard, having needed a little bit of pruning. The husbandman came by and thought, oh, you know, that Matt Biggs vine needs a little bit of pruning to keep him, you know, producing good fruit. So the second thing that's helped me along my way is my work, because I love my work, and I work in horticulture, obviously with Gardener's Question Time. And so the interest that I have and the kind people, so many kind people around me have been very influential. And the third thing, of course, is the plants, because I love the plants and creation. And so when, for example, it was quite interesting how I grasped onto all of these, but in different sets of circumstances, they would become important. So, for example, before I went in for my chemotherapy, I was scared. I'm very nervous, very scared, very anxious. But there were some very scruffy flower beds outside, sadly, of the chemotherapy suite. And so I deadheaded the daffodils on my first visit before I went.
Amazing.
You know,
Amazing.
The second one, Jonathan, I deadheaded the tulips. And then on the further visits, I just did a little bit of weeding. And I asked every time to sit, could I sit where I could look out of the window? And that was just to see the plants. And it was something very comforting. And all this idea in lockdown of mindfulness, Jonathan, and you know, with a love of nature, you know, everybody has become aware of gardening and the natural world, and it's given them solace. And it's been a real powerful message to me that, you know, creation and, you know, the earth and the plants and the animals, the butterflies and all the flora and fauna are perhaps our, you know, we're discovering that they are our natural habitat, and we can get great strength from them, and just being in the right place for the mindfulness, for the distraction, for the reminder of the creator and his work, and the fact that he's still, you know, even though we build our artificial cities, the creator is still sowing seeds in pavements and buddleias on the top of chimney pots.
So what, just very, very briefly, unfortunately, what would you hope that we have learned to keep for the year ahead? What would you like us to take with us into the year ahead?
Right,
what you've learned?
Everyone this evening must take into their year ahead is the fact there's 667,000 acres of back garden in Britain. And they are not just back gardens for us to sit and enjoy, sit on our chairs and enjoy, but they are havens for wildlife. So come on, everyone. Put a few more plants in your garden. Leave stacks of stones for reptiles and beetles to hide under. Even a little cluster of pots, a pile of logs. Leave some nettles in a corner for the butterflies. And all these little things that you do will contribute to the welfare of nature and the responsibility that we were given in the Garden of Eden to care for the earth. So I would like everyone next year to look into the spaces behind their houses, in front of their houses, wherever they can, and think about caring for wildlife and caring for God's earth.
It's really grateful to you, Ben Okri. You were so kind as to speak to our community after the murder of George Floyd, and very, very powerfully. And you and Mirabella then joined for the service, which was very, very special for us. And you wrote in The Guardian extremely powerfully on Why I Can't Breathe has echoed around the world. You're a novelist, you're a Booker Prize winner, you're a friend, for which I'm very, very grateful. And I want to ask you just two questions. The first is, in these very difficult times, what has moved you, what has inspired you? And the follow-up will be, and what are the challenges?
Well, first of all, Rabbi, it's I can't tell you how much of a pleasure and an honor it is always to be in conversation with you. Your company and your conversation is always enlightening, enriching, full of laughter, and joy, and truth, and playfulness. So
thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Now, as to your first question, what has inspired one during this difficult year? It's a hard question to answer, even if it's an easy one to think about. And I would give a few things. I would say family. I think family has been, and by family here, I want to extend the idea of family beyond just the normal sense of one's immediate family, one's spouse, one's partner, one's child, one's relations. I want to include in the idea of family all those who are genuinely close to you, and who you are close to, and who feel the burdens and the beauty of your life as you feel theirs. So family for me here is both a thing of blood and kinship, but it's also a thing of affinity. It's also a thing of affinity and warmth and love and really deep, genuine friendship. I suppose one could use the word community, but community is much wider than family. I think the family I'm referring to here is something much more intimate, and it's people who they feel your travails as you feel theirs. They feel your joys as you feel theirs. That's been one of the first and most inspiring and supportive, strengthening things during this year. Fellow human beings going through the same difficult times, who are being brave and human and getting through the day-to-day and sharing it with you in goodness and with humor.
That really touches me. I really appreciate that.
That's definitely one of them. The other that I really must mention that's been very helpful during this year has been nature. Before the difficulties of this year, I can't say I was somebody who I love nature. I love forests and seas, but when things are busy, one just goes about one's business. But with the pandemic and with lockdown, and the confinement to one's home and to the immediate vicinity, nature, the sky, trees, water suddenly took on greater significance. And I found nature, I found the comfort of trees to have been one of the I found trees and plants and flowers and sky and to be one of the great surprises, especially trees. One of the great surprises of this year for me. You know, that nature stepped into the place where it should always have been, but we ignore it, where we're too busy with our lives. And when, you know, faced with this confinement, this isolation, faced with it, nature became a world. One tree, as Rilke says somewhere, one tree standing up on a hill, one tree in a park, suddenly became a world, suddenly became a friend, suddenly became not the muteness of nature anymore, but the awaiting belovedness of nature. And then of course, it's the great communities that one had the good fortune of coming across. Well, one important example for me was coming to your service. I mean, coming to your service, it was on Zoom, but it felt like I was there with you in the flesh.
We felt you were really there, and we appreciated it.
And it had a big impact on me and my family. It really did. And it gave us a lot to think about in terms of spiritual communities, which I think our modern world is lacking so profoundly. It is one of the ways in which we're lost as a people upon this earth. The absence of spiritual communities. You know, we have pubs, we have pubs and football grounds and cricket grounds and offices, and, you know, but we've not paid enough attention to spiritual communities that sustain us, you know, that remind us of who we are and what we're part of, and the mysterious nature of our estate as human beings on this earth, and within the protection of the intelligent presence of the universe, or of God, or whatever it is people choose to name this sustaining, world sustaining power, force, or being. And then lastly, and not least, of course, it's literature, poetry, books, the mute wisdom of the race. And not so mute, actually, because it speaks in your head and in your spirit. And
you're a writer. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually close there, because
I didn't answer your second question, but that's fine.
I think you did, in a way, by spiritual community, holding on to those things, holding on to the deeper sense of, you made me think of Shakespeare's phrase, friends of my soul, with family. And yes. I share the love of trees and the love of poetry, and if we can hold on to those things and make ourselves more human and more part of this oneness. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege, and hoping to see you in our sukkah soon.
Bless you. Go. Have a great journey. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, love to, Nikki.
Thank you.
That was so beautiful. Rabbi Jonathan, thank you. Thank you for inviting each of them. Thank you for interviewing them. Thank you for building these kinds of relationships between, it's not just you, it's between our community and these extraordinary people in our wider world. In a second, I'm going to ask you, and also Rabbi Zahavit and Rabbi Roni, to respond to those videos. But first, I just want to ask everyone to type into chat. What did you hear? What were some of there were some big themes that I felt were carrying through. Oh, Rabbi Natasha is here as well. Yes, what were some of the themes? So Rachel's saying love and warmth. Yes, indeed. Caring and kindness, feeling part of our community somehow. Thank you, Rachel. Simplicity, beautiful. Love of what we already have, what is around us. Utter genuineness. Yes, each of them was so much just, it exuded out of them. You were brilliant, Jonathan, getting that. Appreciation of health, family, nature, peace, and trees in capital letters. And Sam, I think you've really captured it, that interconnectedness with each other, whether that's through community or family, and also with nature, and that all of this seems to be indivisible in some way. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for sort of seeing those connections between each of our speakers. Even though each of them was saying something distinct and particular, there were also these very, very powerful themes that I felt connected them. I want to invite a little bit more formal feedback here from our rabbinic panel. So I see Rabbi Zahavit's there, Rabbi Roni, and Rabbi Natasha is also there.
Can't see Natasha.
I can't see her, but I'm sure that someone will fix that in a second. So what I want to ask all of you, whether I can see you or not, my fellow rabbinic colleagues, is just for an initial response to that, either to a single speaker or to all of them collectively. You know, what moved you? What made you think again and go, oh, yes, right. Who wants to dive in?
I will. When Matt Biggs was talking about being going to chemo and deadheading the flowers, and then just now when you asked people to respond, I realized that people really wanted to participate and to contribute. There was a strong sense, and actually Reverend Rose said, you know, we suddenly appreciated the people who do basic things like cleaning or portering. I think there was a really powerful sense that people contribute, we notice their contribution and we wish to contribute. And Matt going to the chemo suite and, you know, taking the time to pretty up the gardens was just such a lovely image.
Should I go next?
Sure, jump in. Although I just have to say first, Zahavit, I'm with you. This image of sort of walking up to a chemotherapy suite filled with all of your own anxieties and fears and issues, like you'd be forgiven for that being a very selfish moment, right? And it's so inspiring. And actually, Matt, I think you're on this call. I can't quite see because there's lots of people, but the thought that you would turn that outwards and you would deadhead the daffodils is just completely moving and inspiring to me. And I'm going to be looking to do that the next time I'm feeling a little bit inward and needing to rise above myself. Rabbi Roni.
There's lots that was very interesting. One thing that really struck me, and always strikes me anytime anyone speaks about the pandemic, is that we all lived through very different pandemics, and each of our experiences is not the same as the other person's experience. And hearing people talk about the pandemic as a time of quiet and reflection just completely does not speak to my experience of the pandemic at all, as I was home with two small children trying to homeschool them. So I think we should be aware that the pandemic doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And even though we were all experiencing the pandemic, we were experiencing it differently. But something Bishop Rose said really spoke to me at this time of, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when she spoke about the interconnectedness of the world, realizing how much we all connect to one another. And it made me think of the teaching in the Talmud that each person should view themselves and the entire world as they're on a perfectly balanced scale between good and bad. And just one little action for good can tip the scale for yourself and for the entire world towards good. And that we have the only way to kind of get on is to think of ourselves in that way, that every little bit we do can make a huge difference. Like Matt Biggs was saying about your garden. The little things you can do in your garden, if we all did that, it would make a huge difference to the world. Or as Ben Okri was talking about, the one tree standing in the park, that one small thing that can make such a difference for you and for the world and can tip everything over, because ultimately we're all connected. That's what I took from it.
Oh, and that's a perfect imagery to be bringing in right now during the Amim Noraim of that perfectly balanced scale. And I think back to what Bishop Rose said as well, of appreciating that the contributions that everyone makes is part of that sort of cosmic scale, isn't it? We always sort of look at the big politicians or the big sports stars, but actually it's the person who's, you know, delivering that medicine, right? That is also tipping the scale in one way or the other, that we all have an equal role to play in terms of the difference we can make. Thank you. I'm wondering whether Rabbi Natasha is, I know we're still working on technical stuff there, so I will turn to Rabbi Jonathan. You've had a long time to process what we've just seen, but I wonder whether you have maybe not an initial response, but a more considered response after having interviewed them, and maybe even something about what that's like to be able to interview and to speak to people like that.
Can I mention, first of all, which I should have done in the introduction, that it was Ayala Gottlieb who created and worked on the music for that, and just want to really say a big thank you there. The other thing I noticed, I'm really glad I've had a haircut since I did those interviews. I didn't know David Davies at all beforehand, but they all spoke a language in which I feel completely safe. I feel at home. I feel they're talking about the things that matter, and that doesn't happen every day. And I just, listening to that made me feel I'm in a universe with these people in which what they're saying they care about are the things that I kind of deeply feel I care about and should be cared about. And they feel like, it feels like companionship, you know, different faiths, different fields of endeavor and life. And that's what's really touched me. Together with, and in different ways, I think it comes through with each of them, it was David Davies' phrase, life, how precious, how precarious, and therefore so much to be valued.
Yeah. I'd love to, I'm not quite sure how to do this with so many people on the call, but I'd love to do a little bit of interactive questions and answers here. So if you have a question, maybe just put it into chat, and we'll try and react to it in that way. So feel free if anybody wants to do that. We'll wait a second and see if we get anything, and if not, then I get to continue asking questions. All right, I'm gonna leave you to think of your questions, and I'm going to go ahead and throw in my own question, which is really the same one that Jonathan was asking each of our speakers, about, you know, those challenges from the past, or the inspiration from the past and the challenges of the future. And I'll let each of you choose whether you want to answer one of those, the other, or both. Rabbi Zahavit.
I immediately thought about the arts. I was thinking about how inspiring the arts were. And I remember that very obnoxious advert with the ballerina, where the advertisement suggested that the ballerina might retrain to do some computery stuff. And there was a very big backlash that said, you know, all of you who are not on the front lines are seeking a lot of comfort and getting a lot of diversion and education from the arts. And there's something very unpleasant about diminishing how much the arts helped us to get through these trying times. And I watched more TV than I normally do. And I found amazing stuff to watch, beautiful shows that were full of humanity and amazing dramas. I read millions of books. My cousin, who was visiting here from Israel, told me he finally had time to make the album he always wanted to make. He's a family man. He's got a techie job. He wanted to indulge his artistic side. People learned instruments. The thing I enjoyed was that Rabbi Debbie Young Summers, who's a rabbinic colleague, she collected all the funny memes that people created about COVID, about the festivals, about the toilet rolls, about, you know, the confluence of all the weird things, you know, that was going on. And I saw this outpouring of creativity and the arts. And also I have a friend who's an artist. She produced amazing art. She produced a love letter to Finchley. She said, was always about jetting away around the world. And in fact, David Davies mentioned this. He said, I appreciated that I was able to travel once, but that went away. You know, my friend who's traveled a great deal, she wrote a love letter to Finchley. She put it up in her window so that the local neighbours could appreciate Finchley the way she'd come to appreciate it after 20 years in the neighbourhood. And she also wrote for her Omer project. She wrote love letters to all her friends. And I felt that, you know, she's an artist, so she's a creator, but for many people, there was a sort of turn towards creativity. People took up handicrafts and instruments, those who had the leisure. And, you know, the arts, how could we not respect what they give us when we're stressed, when we need inspiration and comfort? That was deeply inspiring to me.
And Ben mentioned it at the end, didn't he? I was waiting for him to say something about it, and then he kind of said, "Oh yeah, literature," which I think is such a part of him that it's part of the air that he breathes. But it's worth articulating, isn't it?
And I don't know if you remember, Shoshana, early on, there was one of the art museums invited people to try and recreate works of art using household objects, and all of those things were such a delight. They created such a lovely vibe, and they were so inspiring and so fun. And actually something again that David Davies said about how the players, that it's different for them to play without an audience, right? But suddenly when people are admiring one another's creativity, art can be very democratized. People can produce fun stuff for their friends, or, you know, and if it's good, it travels. And you know, that was a beautiful thing, actually, the sort of flowering of artistic creativity. So yeah.
But I also like what you're doing here, Zahavit, which is you're doing this cheshbon nefesh of saying, you know, articulating what it is that I appreciated about the arts over the past year, and for each of us to use these 10 days to do that. So what was it that really I appreciated? Whether it was the arts, whether it was nature, whether it was our connection with family, whether it was silly memes, right, shared with friends. What was it that gave me strength? And to not take that for granted. Because I see that, you know, Paul sort of said, how do we keep the spirit of unity? How do we keep it going in the future? Well, the first step of doing anything more is to notice it and then to articulate it, right? Those are some of the steps of tshuva, right? You have to stop, you have to notice, you have to say it out loud, right? And that's, I would extend Rambam from, it's not just the things that we want to change, it's the things we want to continue. We have to do that same tshuva process. And so what you've just done there around the arts is to say, don't take this for granted. You know, notice it, articulate it, because that's the only way we can carry it forward. Thank you for that. Roni, I saw you were about to jump in there. This isn't me interviewing people, by the way. You can comment on each other.
I guess a bit related to the arts. I was thinking about singing. It was something Matt Biggs said about him needing pruning, which called to mind a verse from Song of Songs. Eit hazamir higia, the time of pruning has come. But the word zamir, which means pruning, also means the time of singing. And so this time of cutting back that he was describing also speaks to the idea of a time of singing, and how much I missed being part of a community that could sing together. It was so painfully absent for so long, and singing by oneself over the Zoom doesn't quite capture that. So it was very beautiful, this Lag BaOmer, when finally I was able to sit down with somebody else. My brother-in-law came around and we sat outside, and we were still doing a Zoom call, but at least he and I were sitting next to each other outside. And just the joy of singing with somebody else was very, very powerful. And now, thank God, we're able to sing again in our shul in Stoke Newington. And it really feels like community is back. When you're leading a service and it's not just your own voice you're hearing, and you can hear the voices of other people. that was been something very, very powerful and moving to me.
That notion of pruning oneself also, I mean, I think he was, it was very poetic what he was saying, because, you know, if you think about surgery, that is what you're doing, right? You're pruning your body, which I'd never thought of. But again, I know I keep coming back to the Yamin Norim, but I think that's okay, right? At this time of year, you know, is that not what we're doing as well on a spiritual level? Is pruning ourselves in some way? That Yom Kippur is that in that moment of denial and of stepping back from doing some of the vital things in our lives, whether it's you know, eating and drinking, whether it's clothing ourselves in luxury, you know, soft, comfortable items, whether it's relating to people sexually, whatever those are, in stepping back and not doing those things for a period of time. In a sense, we're pruning ourselves and trying to reflect on how do we want those parts of our lives to grow differently or better moving forward. So I love that notion of pruning, and I'd never thought about tying it into music, which I think is really can enhance that pruning process.
Shoshana, that also reminds me in our Shul magazine what Reverend Patrick Moriarty said about fasting. And he talks about, you know, the different disciplines that we can employ to grow spiritually, and that we've become quite fearful about fasting, but it's actually a really amazing tool for growth, because in holding back or cutting back, there's also room for growth. And you know, he put it really, really beautifully. If people haven't yet read that article, it's really beautifully stated.
Yeah, and I just want to bring in, you know, there's been some really interesting comments going on in chat, and I think David Berkeley has put out a really profound challenge for us that I want to bring into the conversation. He says, what do you say to someone who says that there are no lessons from the past? She may say that the last 18 months were a matter of survival and are fearful of what future dangers and disasters await in the future. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that and incorporate some of that into the conversation.
I'll give it a go. So one person I asked to be interviewed who said no is Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister. And it was a long shot to ask him, but he'd actually got in touch with me as part of a group of religious leaders he was motivating because of the levels of unemployment. I don't think they've been quite as high as they've feared through much of this country in the wake of the pandemic, and we've yet to see really their full effect. And we're talking about grinding poverty for children in huge numbers. And he wanted religious leadership across all the faiths to really petition and take action on part of this. And so I think there's been some quite difficult things, and I've been thinking about, as well as feeling very at peace with this conversation, it also leaves me feeling that it's terribly, that there are things which it's really important to fight for in an adverse environment. One of them is really social justice. I don't think there's nothing to be learned. I do not understand why the government did not tax people like me to pay the cost for people who really could scarcely afford their food and work food banks. I think it's morally indefensible. And when we are going to say tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, I'm thinking, yeah, tzedakah could really remove the evil of the decree for people. And Matt Biggs was very generous in talking about planting back gardens, but there's a lot more planting that needs to be done in the world. So it's also left me with a sense that, and the pandemic has in a way taken our eye, it's partly put it on, but it's partly taken off the much bigger issue of our planet that is coming our way fast. So I don't think there's nothing to be learned, but I also think that some of the lovely and beautiful things that people have said lead to challenges which we need to really fight about with a leadership in the country which does not reflect the kind of values that our guests spoke about.
Thank you for that, because I think it is crucial, and you said it, Rabbi Roni, that we all went through this differently. My day job is working for a foundation, and our trustees immediately earmarked an additional £10 million, and that we needed to get out the door, which was quite challenging to get it to the people who needed it. For very basic needs. We work with Trussell Trust, which does food banks around the country. Well, it wasn't so easy because people couldn't come to food banks. So it was about solving that problem of making sure we could get trucks so that we could actually flip the model and help Trussell Trust get the food out to people. But some of them, we just couldn't. There were problems we couldn't even throw money at. I remember we were speaking to one head teacher in Wales who said, we said, what do you need? We'll help you get some computers. We'll help you do, all the things that we were doing and working on. And they said, he said, I only have 14% of my kids who have even logged on to the online learning platform. 14%. He said, I don't know where the other 86% are, what's happening with them. They come from chaotic homes, right? And so, David, your question, I think is the correct one. There were people who were at the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy and still are, and who don't have the luxury of reflecting the way we're reflecting right now. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is that I am in a position where I can actually not worry about where my next meal is coming from. So I can be thinking about how do I get that food out to other people. But we're not all in this place where we're ready to reflect back on the year. There are still people who are very much still trying to deal with basic needs. And this is the time of year when we need to be thinking about where does our tzedakah go and how do we help them. So thank you for raising that. We only have a few more minutes, and what I want to ask each of you before we close is, what are you taking away from this conversation tonight that you're going to sort of bring into your Yom Kippur reflections? And I guess it's quite a personal question, I guess, that I'm asking. I'm asking you, what is it that you personally, that rabbis give so much to their communities, and particularly on Yom Kippur, and you're thinking about what do others need to hear? And so I'm asking you not what you're going to give to your community, but what is it that you're taking for yourself that will allow you to do the work that you want to do for yourself on Yom Kippur?
I think for a start, the question about tzedakah, it's a helpful question because it's actually in some ways very tangible. Rabbi Jonathan just talking about how much our money can actually just make a difference. And to really take it, this may happen after Yom Kippur because other things need to happen before Yom Kippur. But to take some time to reflect on where is my tzedakah money going, and thankfully there have been things that I have not had to spend money on in the last 18 months that normally I would have. And so in some ways I have more money than I had before. In some ways I've been very lucky to still be employed and have a job. And to think, well, how can I use that tzedakah money to make good impact in the world? I like it, it's nice and tangible. And maybe it's something we can get to grips with.
Thank you for that.
Zahavit, did you want to go?
It was very moving to hear Ben Okri reflect back to us how moved he was by watching our Kabbalat Shabbat service and how he felt that there was a tangible sense of community, even though it was virtual. He was really struck by something that we know and we value, but that religious community is a whole separate thing. you know, it's very special. It brings different values and a different, you know, feel to our gatherings. And I suppose, you know, I'm more and more intrigued by the nature of gathering and different kinds of gathering and what works and why it works. I've just read a book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering, which is a fabulous book, very affirming in some ways. It told me that some of the tricks I'd picked up were out there and also taught me some new ones. But, you know, she talks a lot about the kind of underlying dynamics of why some gatherings feel amazing and stuff happens and some never really get off the ground. And, you know, I think we've really, as a religious community, you know, that's really a skill that we develop. And Reverend Rose, you know, really got that. And for Ben Okri, it was something very remarkable. And I know that I never felt truly happy doing virtual services. And I felt a profound sense of connection as soon as we were back in person. You know, so it reinforced for me that religious community is so close to this idea of communion, that you have to be close, like really up close and connected for the magic to happen. And, you know, I'll never take that for granted. And I don't believe it can really be recreated outside of being in the same physical space together. I mean, we did a nice job and we do it because we have to, but there's nothing that can compare to actually sharing this space.
Thank you.
I'm going to take away a couple of things. One is that there are people like the people I was privileged to interview in the world, and many, many more, including in our communities, to whom I can turn, who are allies, who help me piece my values back together when I lose track of them. You're one of them. All of the people, Roni and Zahavit and you, Shoshana, very much are some of them, Nikki next to me. But I'm also very much thinking, how can very much feel challenged by what can I do to really aid the struggle for the things that matter in terms of the social justice, the racial justice, and the environmental justice that challenge us all. How can we be effective? What's the most it's possible to do in one's life? That question gnaws at me, but the thought of companionship in it comforts me.
Yes, and what I hear underlying that, Jonathan, was also very much there with the speakers of this tension between being and doing. Right, we get it on Shabbat and the rest of the week, right? And we need to get that balance right in our lives of being and reflecting and communing with nature and with community, and then rolling up our sleeves and getting out and doing, and then reflecting and then doing, and getting that balance right between the two. Before we end, I also just want to highlight a great comment. I hope people have been following the chat, but Charles, I right up there with Tzedakah, he sort of said that his company provides an internship for a youngster from an underprivileged background for each piece of work we sell. If more organizations can be encouraged to do the same, it would have an enormous positive impact on society and the younger generation. These very practical doing things, right, which is part of social justice and part of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be something big. It can be giving someone an internship, right? That's an extraordinary act of social justice. I can't possibly sum up the past hour. There's been so many pearls of wisdom that have been shared. I think the message that I've taken away from all of this is very much one of interconnectedness, the interconnectedness of people, of communities, of nature, of the arts, of all of us being together, both tonight, but also in general, as we get out there and actually start seeing each other. And so I'll just share one of my favorite scenes in literature, Kurt Vonnegut, Sirens of Titan. There are these little creatures. They're called harmoniums, which of course as a musician I love. And they're very, very simplistic creatures. They all they can do is, they don't even speak. They have telepathic powers, but they only have two messages. So one message is they can just go, here I am, here I am. Hineni. Here I am, here I am, here I am. And the response to that is the only other thing that they know how to transmit. And that is, so glad you are, so glad you are. And I feel like in some ways that is the definition of this interconnectedness, where we say, here I am, and the response telepathically in the ether is just, so glad you are. So thank you all for being here. So glad you are. In particular, I want to thank our speakers this evening, Bishop Rose, Ben Okri, Matt Biggs, and David Davies, our wonderful, wonderful rabbinic team, Rabbi Roni, Rabbi Zahavit, Rabbi Jonathan, Rabbi Natasha, even though we had a technical problem in spirit, we thank her, and very much Rivka and Ayala and Claire, for the technological magic that made this evening happen. Thank you all. I wish you a Gemar Tov, and I hope to see you in person in the next year. Be well, everyone.
And a big thank you to you, Shoshana. Thank you.
Night, Jonathan. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Shoshana. Thanks, Roni.
Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. Thank you, everyone.